Hey, I'm Nico, and here are 30 useless facts about the PlayStation 2. Don't you just love the way the PS2 looks? It's so pretty, being shaped like a box and featuring perpendicular lines across it. Well, this look was actually inspired by a computer released in 1993. Here is the Atari Falcon Microbox 030-040. Let's put those both side by side. Wow, now I can definitely see it. And Sony does too, as the PS2 patent actually mentions Atari. Nice! Teiyu Goto, a product designer working on the PS2, actually chose the color black for the console because, according to him, PlayStation 2's real-time graphics have no limitation, and the color black represents the infinity of the universe. The blue logo represents the intelligence and life spouting up. Hey, I'm not so sure what any of that means either, but I think the PS2 looks pretty good, so this dude definitely knew what he was doing. One of the main new features of the PS2 wasn't even gaming related. In fact, one of the reasons the PS2 was so popular was because it would actually play DVDs. This technology was pretty new back in the days, so having a console that would be used for both gaming and media consumption was pretty novel. The official PS2 memory card was 8 MB big, which was actually quite small for the amount of space game saves actually required. This led to people having to buy multiple memory cards, and eventually there was a shortage of those, making players unable to save their games. That must have been very frustrating. So games for the PS2 were available on both CD-ROMs and DVDs. In order to know which is which, you had to look at the disc itself. The CD-ROMs were blue in color and the DVDs were silver. Come to think of it, the original PlayStation had black discs, so it looks like Sony actually loved color coding its discs. Within a day after launching, the PS2 sold 1 million units, which is insane when you think about it. What a great start to a great console. As the PlayStation 2 can be placed both horizontally and vertically, you can actually rotate the little PS2 logo that's on the front of the console. Now this is attention to detail. When you boot the console, you'll see some white towers in the background. Well, their size and the amount you see depends on the content of your memory card. The more save files you have, the more towers you'll see, and the bigger they are, the taller the tower will be. That's so cool! There were multiple models of PS2 released, but the biggest change was when Sony introduced the slim model PS2. I mean, take a good look at this one. It's completely different. It is super small, but can still do anything the fat model can. Impressive! Back in the year 2000, some media outlets reported that over 4,000 PS2s had been bought in the US and shipped out to Iraq. The US military was afraid that several PS2s could be linked together to create a supercomputer, which could then be used to control a missile. This led to an export control law on the PS2, which actually limited the amount of consoles that could be shipped to certain countries. Wow! Another thing the PS2 could do is to play your original PlayStation 1 games. There were a couple games that were not compatible with this feature, but most actually were. This led to Sony making the PS2 compatible with original PS1 memory cards, as well as the original DualShock controller. All of this without any accessory needed. You know how consoles updates are all done over the internet nowadays? Well, back then, Sony planned to use the memory cards to install some updates. The feature wasn't used that much, up until the modding community got their hands on the feature and used it to run homebrew softwares on the PS2. There's a console released exclusively in Japan called the PSX. It is actually a personal video recorder that you could use to watch TV and also record it. Obviously, it also was a PlayStation 2 home console, so it played DVDs and everything. Sadly, as it was super expensive, it wasn't that popular and never left Japan. The PS2 got gamers excited for motion controls and augmented reality when the iToy peripheral was released. Basically, it was a webcam that allowed users to use their own body as the controller. Think of it as a very basic version of Microsoft's Kinect. Okay, this next fact is a bit insane, but here we go. A British man by the name of Dan Holmes actually loved his PS2 so much that he decided to legally change his name to Mr. PlayStation 2. Wow. And he also asked the church to marry him and his console. There's no proof that this has been done, but man, this guy really loved the PS2. This dude probably owned the Sony Bravia KDL22PX300, which is a Sony TV with a PS2 built inside of it. What the heck, bro? Who comes up with those ideas? PlayStation 2 is the first video game console to ever have the Netflix app. Exclusively released in Brazil, gamers could actually order a disc that would allow them to get access to the Netflix catalog on the PS2. That's insane! The PlayStation had HD support for 4 different games via the use of component cables. If you had the games and the cables, you could experience those games in 1080i, which, keep in mind, no other consoles did at the time. You could also use the PS2 to play online games with the use of an adapter. Once you had it, connecting online was free and painless. It's a shame we now have to pay for premium online plans with newer consoles. Sony released a kit in 2002 that allowed the PS2 console to be used as a personal computer. This kit included a Linux-based operating system, a keyboard and a mouse, as well as a VGA adapter, a network adapter, and a hard drive. Well, I guess that's one way to use your old PS2. Ever wondered what happens if you put a non-PS2 or PS1 disc inside of a PlayStation? Well, you get this very eerie, kinda creepy red screen of death with some odd sounds playing in the background. Ah man, this is cursed. Speaking of, there were a lot of users that had problems and disk errors with the original PS2 models, leading up to a class action lawsuit which, when resolved, allowed affected customers to get a replacement PS2 game as well as a $25 check for the inconvenience. There was supposed to be a music streaming service for the PS2, which was announced by Sony, but it never happened. You can actually plug in any USB mouse to the PS2 and it will recognize it, so for the few games that allow mouse controls, it will be quite simple. At the time of me making this video, the PlayStation 2 is the best-selling console of all time, with 158 million consoles sold to the public. Dang, that's a lot of PS2 in the wild. And one of the reasons it sold so much was probably because of how many games were out for the thing. A total of 3,874 games were available and sold 1.5 billion copies. Yes, billion! The last game on the PS2 was Pro Evolution Soccer 2014, and the game was released on November 8, 2013. But keep in mind that the successor to the PS2, the PS3, was released in 2006, and its successor, the PS4, was released in 2013. So yeah, technically, there were still new PS2 games coming out while the PS4 was a thing. Now, those were some amazing useless facts, so amazing in fact that you should subscribe to my channel and tap the cards on screen to watch more. Alright, bye!